Sarah's hands moved with practiced precision as she checked Velthor's vital signs, her fingers pressing against the pulse points she had memorized from Zentari anatomy texts just 3 weeks ago. When she'd arrived on the ship, the squadron leader's skin was cold to the touch. His breathing shallow and irregular. Every instinct from her years of training told her he was dying. But every lesson from the resource wars on Earth told her that instinct was just a starting point, not the conclusion. What is she doing? Lekmar asked from the observation deck, his compound eyes tracking Sarah's movements with confusion through the speakers. They could hear her humming softly to herself, a human habit that seemed bizarre. In the sterile medical environment, Sarah pulled out a device from the emergency kit that made Zixala actually gasp in surprise. Is that a stethoscope? The Lumine physician asked. I thought those were extinct. Krathzix watched as Sarah placed the ancient diagnostic tool against Velthor's chest, moving it methodically from one location to another. Her eyes closed in concentration. Coalition scanners can provide a full body analysis in 0.7 seconds. Lekmar said, why would she use something so primitive? Maybe she doesn't trust what she can't hear for herself, Krathzix murmured. Surprising himself with the observation, Sarah finished her physical examination and moved to the medical terminal, her fingers flying across the interface as she pulled up detailed scans. She studied them for several minutes, her brow furrowed in concentration, occasionally zooming in on specific areas. Then she did something that made every observer lean forward in disbelief. She picked up an actual syringe, not a nano-injector, not an energy-based delivery system, but a physical needle attached to a tube. She's going to manually extract blood samples? Zixila's voice rose in pitch. The automated systems already have complete blood analysis. Sarah carefully inserted the needle into Velthor's arm, drawing several vials of the darkened blood with steady hands. She labeled each vial by hand with a marker, another obsolete tool that shouldn't exist on a modern starship. The automated systems told you he was dying, Sarah said calmly, apparently aware they were watching and listening. I want to see for myself what they missed. She placed the samples under a physical microscope, again, a tool considered ancient history, and spent 20 minutes examining them. Observers watched in fascinated silence as she made notes on actual paper with an actual pen. This is absurd. Lekmar finally said, our quantum scanners can detect individual viral particles. What could she possibly see with optical magnification? Sarah straightened from the microscope and turned to face the observation window. Your scanners are looking for active pathogens in the bloodstream, she called out, but the void spores aren't in his blood anymore. They're dormant in his neural tissue, only releasing toxins into the circulatory system. Zixala's crystalline body flickered rapidly, a sign of intense thought among her people. That's impossible. Our scans would have detected. Your scans are programmed to find active threats. Sarah interrupted. The spores are hiding in plain sight, mimicking dead neural cells. By the time your systems identify them as foreign, they've already moved to new locations. She turned back to Velthor and began preparing equipment that made the Coalition physicians exchange worried glances. What I'm about to do is going to look crazy by your standards, Sarah said, pulling out tubing and filters from the emergency supplies. But on Earth, when someone's blood is poisoned and their body can't filter it fast enough, we help the process along. She was setting up a dialysis system, manually configuring pumps and filters in a way that seemed impossibly crude compared to the Coalition's nanofiltration technology. She's going to filter his blood outside his body? Krathzix asked. That's barbaric. That's effective, Sarah replied without looking up. His immune system is overwhelmed trying to fight on too many fronts. If I can remove the toxins from his bloodstream, his body can focus on fighting the spores in his neural tissue. Lekmar's mandibles clicked rapidly in agitation. This will kill him faster. The stress on his cardiovascular system alone will be less than the stress of his organs shutting down one by one. Sarah finished. She carefully inserted the filtration lines into Velthor's major blood vessels. Her hands rock steady despite the complexity of Xanthari vascular anatomy. Besides, I'm not just filtering, I'm treating. She held up several containers of liquid that made Zixela actually step back from the observation window. Are those chemical antibiotics? The Lumine physician asked in horror. Ancient Earth medicines? Broad-spectrum antibiotics, immunosuppressants, and a few compounds we developed during the plague years, Sarah confirmed. Your nanobots are too specific, looking for exact matches to known pathogens. These chemicals don't care about exact matches. They slow down all rapid cellular growth, giving the immune system breathing room. Those drugs have been obsolete for 300 years. Detmer protested. They have massive side effects. Side effects we can treat, Sarah said calmly. Adding measured doses to the filtration system. Death is a side effect we can't. The system hummed to life. Velthor's dark blood beginning to flow through the transparent tubes, Sarah monitored the process with absolute focus, adjusting flow rates and medication levels based on readings that combined coalition monitors with her own observations. Kratchix found himself unable to look away. There was something mesmerizing about watching her work. Every movement deliberate. Every decision made with confidence despite the primitive tools she employed. Her methodology is sound, Zixela admitted reluctantly after 30 minutes. Crude, but sound. She's essentially doing what our nanobots attempt, but manually and at a larger scale. The question is whether it will be enough. Vecmer added. An alarm suddenly shrieked across the medical bay. Velthor's heart rate was spiking dangerously. His 3 hearts falling out of sync with each other. Cardiac cascade. Zixela shouted, "He's going into arrest." Sarah was already moving, her hands grabbing the manual defibrillator paddles, another ancient tool that existed only in the emergency supplies because coalition regulations required backups for every system. Clear, she shouted, pressing the paddles against Velthor's chest in the precise pattern for Xanthari. Cardiac anatomy. The shock made his body arch off the bed. The monitors showed no change. Again, Sarah repositioned the paddles, accounting for the unique spacing of his 3 hearts. Clear. Another shock. This time, 1 heart resumed beating. Sarah didn't hesitate, adjusting the paddles for the 2nd heart. "Come on," she muttered, her calm facade cracking slightly. "Fight!" The 3rd shock brought the 2nd heart online, but the 3rd heart remained still. Sarah set down the paddles and placed her hands directly on Volur's chest, beginning manual compressions. "What is she doing?" Kratchix demanded. The defibrillator failed. "She's manually pumping his 3rd heart," Zixela said, her voice filled with wonder. She memorized the exact location and rhythm. Sarah counted under her breath, maintaining precise pressure and timing 30 compressions. Then she grabbed the paddles again. "Last chance." "Squadron leader," she said quietly, "don't make me explain to your general that you quit on me." She delivered the shock for 3 seconds. Nothing happened. Then the 3rd heart gave a weak flutter, then another, then settled into rhythm with its companions. Sarah sagged against the bed for just a moment before straightening and returning to her equipment checks. "Vital signs stabilizing," she reported, her voice steady again despite the sweat on her forehead. "Blood toxin levels decreasing. Immune response showing increased activity in neural regions." She looked directly at the observation window, directly at Kratchix. He crashed because his body was too weak to handle both the treatment and the disease. She said, "That's going to happen again. Probably multiple times. Each time I bring him back, his immune system gets stronger. Or he dies." Vecmer said, "Or he dies." Sarah agreed. "But he was already dead by your prognosis." This way, at least he's fighting. Krasix watched the human doctor return to her vigil, adjusting tubes and monitoring equipment with the same steady hands that had just restarted a warrior's heart. How long can she maintain this? He asked. Unknown. Zixala replied, but General, you should see these readings. His condition is actually improving. Marginally but measurably. Krasix's claws tightened. On the observation rail, perhaps the humans. Madness contained its own form of wisdom, perhaps refusing. To accept defeat was its own kind of strength. He activated his communicator. All medical personnel are to observe Dr. Chun's procedures and document everything, he ordered. If she succeeds, I want to know how, and if she fails? His aide asked. Krasix watched Sarah check Velther's pulse with her fingers rather than trusting the monitors alone. Then at least we'll know someone tried when everyone else had given up, he said. The long night was just beginning. Hour 3 brought the second crisis. Sarah had just finished replacing one of the filtration units when Velther's respiratory system began failing. His lungs unable to process oxygen efficiently as the void spores attacked the delicate tissues. She responded by manually adjusting the atmospheric mixture in the containment room, increasing oxygen content while adding a mild sedative to reduce his body's oxygen demands. She's turning the entire room into a hyperbaric chamber, Zixala observed. Clever. By hour 5, Sarah had removed her jacket entirely, working in just her thin undershirt as the temperature in the containment room climbed. The equipment she was using generated more heat than the climate control could efficiently remove. But she couldn't power any of it down without risking. Velther's tenuous stability sweat plastered her hair to her forehead. But her hands never shook. Razix had not left the observation deck. He had sent for food and water, which sat untouched beside him. His entire command staff had tried to relieve him, to convince him to rest. But he had refused each time. If this human could stand vigil for hours without break, so could he. General, you should see this, his intelligence officer said, pulling up data on a secondary screen. We've, received Dr. Chun's service record from Earth Central Command. Krasix tore his eyes from the medical bay long enough to scan me. Information. His eyes widened slightly. Sarah Chun had served 7 years as a combat surgeon during Earth's resource wars before joining the Coalition Medical Corps. Her record showed 347 field operations, often under fire, with a survival rate that was statistically improbable. She had been decorated 4 times for refusing to evacuate wounded soldiers, even when her position was being overrun. One citation specifically noted that she had performed a 6-hour surgery in a collapsed bunker while enemy forces searched overhead. She's done this before, Krasix said quietly. Not this exactly, but close enough. He looked back at Sarah, seeing her differently now. She wasn't naive or reckless. She was experienced in fighting battles that others had already declared lost. Hour 7 saw Velther crash again. This time, Sarah didn't even call for the defibrillator. She simply placed her hands on his chest and began compressions, counting rhythmically while watching the monitors with clinical detachment. After 90 seconds, his heart resumed beating. She returned to her equipment checks as if nothing had happened. How is this possible? Zakmar asked, his mandibles clicking in agitation. His body should have given up by now. Maybe his body doesn't know it's supposed to give up, Zixala said thoughtfully. Maybe watching someone refuse to quit is contagious. By hour 9, the entire ship's crew was aware of what was happening. Judy, personnel had begun gathering in the corridors near the medical bay. Watching the live feed on their personal devices, betting pools had started on whether the human doctor would succeed, not because they wanted Velther to die, but because hope needed somewhere to go. Sarah had no idea she had an audience of thousands. She was entirely focused on the warrior before her. adjusting medication levels, replacing filters, checking neural activity scans, and occasionally talking to Velthor, even though he couldn't hear her. "You've been fighting for 60 years, she said as she drew another blood sample. "Don't stop now just because the enemy is small." Hour 12 arrived with another alarm. This time, it was Sarah's. Hazmat suit, a small breach had been detected in the right sleeve, likely caused by catching on equipment during one of the cardiac emergencies. Warning lights flashed red across her suit's status panel. "Dr. Chun, evacuate immediately." Zixela's voice came through the speakers. "You've been exposed to the contamination." Sarah looked at her sleeve, then at Velthor's monitors. Then back at her sleeve, she reached over and silenced the suits. "Alarm. Exposure was inevitable the moment I came in here with anything less than full isolation gear," she said. Calmly, "I chose mobility over protection because I knew I'd need to move fast." "You knew you would be infected?" Krathzik's voice was incredulous. "I considered it likely," Sarah replied. Checking Velthor's neural scans. "The filtration units need to be changed every 90 minutes. And each change requires precise manual manipulation. Full isolation gloves would have made that impossible." She pulled up her own vital signs on a secondary monitor. The early stages of void spore infection were already visible in her bloodstream. "How long do you have?" Krathzik asked, his voice strange. "Based on my smaller body mass and faster metabolism, probably 6 to 8 hours before I'm in the same condition." "Velthor was when I started," Sarah said matter-of-factly, "but he's stabilizing now. Another hour, and his immune system will have adapted enough to fight the spores on its own." "You gambled your life on probably," Krathzik said. "I gambled my life on certainty," Sarah corrected. "I was certain that Velthor would die without intervention. I was certain that I was the only person willing to try. I was certain that some things matter more than personal safety." She began preparing a medication cocktail for herself, her movements still steady despite the fatigue that must be overwhelming her. "Besides, if my treatment works on him, I can use the same protocols on myself once he's stable." "If it works," Dekmar said. "When it works," Sarah replied firmly. Hour 13 brought a change. Valus neural scans showed the first signs of immune response in the areas where void spores had been dormant. His body was finally recognizing the invaders and mounting a defense. "It's working." Zixela breathed. She bought him enough time. Sarah allowed herself a small smile but didn't slow her pace. She increased the dosage of immune boosters in the filtration system, supporting Velthor's body as it began to fight back. By hour 15, Sarah was visibly weakening. Her movements were slower, more deliberate, as if each action required conscious thought. The infection was spreading through her system faster than she had calculated. Her exposure had been more severe than she'd realized. She stumbled slightly while changing a filtration unit, catching herself on the bed rail. "Dr. Chun, your vital signs are deteriorating rapidly," Zixela said, her voice urgent. "You must evacuate now and let us treat you." "Can't," Sarah said, her words slightly slurred. "Need to finish the protocols. Velthor needs another hour of filtration before his immune system can maintain on its own." She straightened with visible effort and returned to her task. "I'm staying." Krathzik made his decision. "Security teams, suit up for contamination protocols," he ordered. "The moment Dr. Chung collapses, I want her extracted and in treatment within 60 seconds. General, if you breach the containment too early, you risk undoing everything she's accomplished," Zixela warned. "If we wait too long, she dies." Krathzik countered. "Prepare for extraction, but do not enter until I give the order." He leaned closer to the observation window, watching Sarah force herself to continue working despite her body's rebellion. "Come on, doctor," he muttered. "Finish your hour." Sarah checked Velther's monitors with shaking hands. His immune response was strengthening steadily now. His body finally winning the battle against the void spore's neural activity was returning to normal levels. Toxin counts in his blood were dropping rapidly. She had actually done. A wave of dizziness hit her, and she grabbed the bed rail for support. The room spun violently. Not yet, she whispered. Just a few more minutes. She fumbled with the filtration controls, setting them to automated maintenance mode. Now that Velther's body could handle the reduced support, her legs gave out, and she slid to the floor, her back against the medical bed. Through blurring vision, she saw Velther's chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. His hearts were beating strong and synchronized. "You're going to make it," she said, her voice barely audible. Then consciousness left her. Alarms screamed across every monitor. Krathix was already moving. "Go! Get her out now." The containment door burst open as 4 security officers in full isolation suits rushed in. Krathix was right behind them. Proprietary safety be damned. He personally lifted Sarah's unconscious form, cradling her with surprising gentleness for someone with claws behind him. Velther's eyes flickered open for the first time in hours. The squadron leader's gaze focused on Sarah being carried out. An understanding dawned in his expression. He tried to speak but managed only a weak gesture toward her. Krathix understood anyway. "I know," the general said. "We're going to save her. I swear it." As they rushed Sarah to the emergency treatment bay, Velther summoned the last of his strength and triggered the emergency alert on his medical bed. His vitals might be stabilizing, but hers were crashing. Every medic on the ship needed to know the human had saved him now. It was their turn to prove they could learn from her courage. Sarah woke to the sound of voices speaking in urgent, clipped tones. Her body felt like it was filled with lead, every muscle aching with a deep exhaustion that went beyond mere fatigue. The ceiling above her was the standard Coalition medical bay, white, too bright even through her half-closed eyes. "Adjust the flow rate by 0.3 milliliters," Zixala's voice said, and increase the broad-spectrum antibiotic concentration. The human used higher doses than recommended. "Are you certain?" "That was Dekmar. The side effects are preferable to death," Zixala interrupted sharply. "She taught us that. Have you already forgotten?" Sarah tried to speak but managed only a weak croak immediately. A face appeared in her field of vision. Krathix. His reptilian features creased with something that looked almost like concern. "Don't try to talk," he said. "You've been unconscious for 6 hours. Your body was in severe systemic shock when we brought you out 6 hours. That meant Velther had been stable for at least 5 hours without her intervention." Relief flooded through her even as another wave of dizziness made the room tilt. "The human is regaining consciousness," Krathix called out. "Update me on her status." Sarah heard the clicking of equipment and the soft hum of Coalition medical technology. But there was something else too. The familiar sound of a manual filtration pump. They were using her methods. "Toxin levels have decreased by 40% in the last 4 hours, Zixala reported. Moving into Sarah's line of sight, the Lumine physician's crystalline body was pulsing with colors Sarah had never seen before. Apparently, extreme stress had visible effects on her species. "Neural activity is responding to treatment. We're following the protocols you established with Squadron Leader Velther." Sarah tried to sit up, but Krathix gently pressed her back down with one massive clawed hand. "Velther?" She managed to whisper, "Recovering," Krathix said, and something in his voice made Sarah focus on him more clearly. "Thanks to you, he's alive and stable. His body successfully adapted its immune response and is now naturally fighting the void spores." "Then why?" Sarah had to pause to gather strength. "Why do you look worried?" "Because you were less successful at treating yourself than you were at treating him," Krathix said bluntly. Your exposure was more severe and occurred while your body was already exhausted. By the time we extracted you, the infection had progressed significantly further than Velthor's had when you began treatment. Sarah processed this information with the detached calm of someone who had faced death before. What's my prognosis? Unknown, Zixilla admitted. We're using your methods, but adapting them is proving difficult. Coalition physicians are trained to trust automated systems and algorithmic protocols. Manually adjusting treatments in real time based on patient response feels dangerously imprecise. Vekmer added, his mandibles clicking. Nervously, Sarah would have laughed if she'd had the strength. That's because it is dangerous and imprecise, she said. But sometimes imprecise and adaptive beats precise and inflexible. Explain, Krasix commanded. Though his tone was more request than order, Sarah took a shallow breath, organizing her thoughts through the fog of infection and medication. Coalition. Medicine is optimized for consistency, she said. Slowly, you've developed protocols that work for 99% of cases. When you encounter the 1% that doesn't fit the model, your systems don't know how to adapt. She paused, gathering strength. Human medicine evolved differently. We spent thousands of years treating diseases we didn't understand with tools we could barely control. We learned to watch, to adjust, to try new approaches when the standard ones failed. Primitive trial and error, Dekmer said. But there was less dismissal in his voice than before. Adaptive response. Sarah corrected. Same thing. Different framing. An alarm chimed softly. Not the harsh scream of earlier crises, but a gentle warning. Sarah's heart rate was becoming irregular. Zixilla moved immediately to the equipment, her crystalline fingers dancing over controls with newfound confidence, but Sarah saw the hesitation in her movements. The moment of uncertainty before each adjustment. You're thinking too much, Sarah said quietly. You're trying to calculate the optimal response when you should be feeling your way forward. We are physicians, not mystics, Zixilla replied. But her voice held doubt. We cannot simply feel the correct treatment. Yes, you can, Sarah insisted, fighting to keep her eyes open. You just have to stop being afraid of being wrong. The door to the medical bay suddenly slid open with a pneumatic Hisfulthar stood in the doorway. Supported by two medical assistants, but standing nonetheless, his skin color had returned almost to normal, and his 3 hearts were beating visibly beneath his chest in a strong, synchronized rhythm. What are you doing out of bed? Krasix demanded, but there was relief in his voice. Folded from his assistants and walked forward on his own, each step steadier than the last, coming to ensure you don't let the doctor who saved my life die from excessive caution, he said. His voice rough from disuse. He moved to Sarah's bedside and looked down at her with eyes that held a warrior's respect. I heard you talking to me while I was unconscious, he said. You told me not to stop fighting just because the enemy was small, Sarah managed. A weak smile. Good advice, right? Excellent advice, Velthor agreed. He turned to Zixilla and Dekmer. I was dying. Your protocols and procedures had given up on me. This human did not. She didn't save me with advanced technology or superior knowledge. She saved me with stubbornness and refusal to accept defeat. He pointed at the filtration equipment. She used crude tools and ancient medicines because they were what she could control, what she could adapt in real time. She watched me fail twice and brought me back both times because giving up wasn't an option in her mind. Velthor's voice grew stronger as he spoke. Now she needs that same stubbornness from us. Stop trying to treat her perfectly and start trying to treat her successfully. There's a difference? Dekmer asked. Yes, Sarah whispered. Perfect treatment means following all the rules. Successful treatment means the patient lives. Sometimes you have to break rules to get to success. Krasix straightened to his full height, decision crystallizing in his expression. Zixala, you're the senior physician, he said, but for the next however many hours this takes, you follow Squadron Leader Velther's guidance. He's the only one here who survived what Dr. Chun is fighting. Zixala's crystalline form flickered through a rainbow of colors as she processed this highly irregular command. Then she bowed her head in acceptance. What would you have us do, Squadron Leader? Velther moved to examine the monitors, his trained eye taking in data despite his own weakness. Increase the filtration flow rate, he said after a moment, when my toxin levels were at this stage. Dr. Chen increased it by 15%. That will stress her cardiovascular system. Dekmar protested. Yes, Velther agreed. But the alternative is letting the toxins overwhelm her organs. She chose the lesser of two dangers. Make the adjustment. Zixala made the change, her movements becoming more confident over the next hour. Velther guided them through a dozen adjustments, each one based on his memory of how Sarah had treated him. She added this compound when my neural scans showed this pattern. She reduced oxygen flow when my respiration became too rapid. She manually compressed my hearts when they fell out of rhythm, slowly. Sarah's vital signs began to stabilize. The infection was still present, still dangerous. But her body was starting to mount its own defense. It's working, Zixala said. Wonder in her voice. Her immune response is increasing. Sarah felt the change in her body, the slight easing of the crushing fatigue, the gradual clearing of her thoughts. She wasn't out of danger yet, but she was fighting back. Thank you, she whispered, looking at Velthoth's Squadron Leader. Placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You didn't let me give up, he said simply. I'm returning the favor. Krathsix watched the scene with an expression that was difficult to read when he finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but carried to every corner of the room. The Apex General said no one could rescue Squadron Leader Velther, he said. The human doctor proved the Apex General wrong. He looked at Sarah with something approaching respect. Perhaps we have optimized ourselves into rigidity, he continued. Perhaps we've forgotten that medicine is much art as science. Perhaps we needed someone from a primitive species to remind us what it means to truly fight for a patient's life. Sarah closed her eyes, letting exhaustion claim her again. But this time, it was the exhaustion of someone who had fought and was winning, not lost. Rest. Dr. Chun, Krathsix said, we'll take it from here. As consciousness faded, Sarah heard Velther's voice giving quiet instructions to the medical team. He was teaching them what she had taught him. The lesson was spreading sometimes. The best way to advance was to remember what you'd left behind. 3 days later, Sarah sat in a recovery chair on the observation deck, watching stars streak past as the Coalition flagship traveled through hyperspace toward its next assignment. Her body still ached, and she tired easily. But the void spores were gone from her system. Velther had been right. Her own protocols, adjusted and refined by the alien physicians who'd learned from her example, had saved her life just as they'd saved his. The door chimed, and Velther entered, moving with almost his normal grace, though Sarah could see the careful way he held himself that suggested lingering. Soreness, Dr. Chun. He greeted her with a formal bow that seemed to carry more weight than a simple gesture. I wanted to check on your recovery. I'm good, Sarah said, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. Tired, but good. Apparently fighting death takes it out of you. Velther settled into the chair with a slight grimace. I wanted to thank you properly, he said, not just for saving my life, though that deserves more gratitude than words can convey. But for what? Sarah asked, genuinely curious. For teaching us something we had forgotten. Velther replied, that medicine isn't just about technology and protocols. It's about refusing To accept defeat even when logic says there's no hope. He looked out at the stars. I've been a warrior for 60 years. I faced death more times than I can count. But I never truly understood what courage meant until I watched you fight for a patient everyone else had declared lost. Sarah felt her cheeks warm. I just did my job. No. Valther said firmly, you did far more than your job. You risked your life for someone you'd barely met, using methods you knew would expose you to the same contamination. That's not duty. That's something deeper. Before Sarah could respond, her communicator chimed. The message was brief and official. She was summoned to appear before the Coalition Medical Review Board in 1 hour. They're going to court-martial me, aren't they? Sarah said, reading the message, for violating quarantine protocols. Probably, Valther admitted. Though if they do, they'll have to court-martial me as well for supporting your methods. And half the medical staff who watched and learned from what you did. Sarah stood, steadying herself against the chair for just a moment. Well, let's go find out if saving lives is considered a crime in the Coalition. The review chamber was intimidating by design. A circular room with the review board seated in an elevated semicircle. Looking down on whoever stood in the center, Sarah took her position in that center, very aware of the dozen board members, studying her with expressions that ranged from curiosity to stern disapproval. Admiral Kreshtar, a Lumine elder whose crystalline body showed the deep blue of extreme age, spoke first. Dr. Sarah Chun, you stand accused of violating containment protocols, endangering ship safety, and conducting unauthorized medical procedures. How do you respond to these charges? Guilty on all counts, Sarah said. Simply. A murmur ran through the observers packed into the gallery. Apparently humans weren't supposed to just admit to violations. However, Sarah continued, I would argue that my actions were justified under Article 7, Section 12 of the Coalition Charter, which grants medical personnel the right to override safety protocols when they believe life-saving intervention is possible. That article was never intended for situations like this, one of the board members said sharply. It was written for emergencies involving accidents, not deliberate exposure to lethal pathogens. Then perhaps the article should be rewritten. Valther's voice rang out from the gallery. He stood, and the entire room turned to look at him. Or perhaps it should be enforced as written, without adding caveats that would render it meaningless. Squadron Leader Valther, you are here as a witness, not an advocate, Admiral Kreshtar said. Though her tone was gentle, I am here as someone who was declared dead by our finest physicians, Valther replied, walking forward to stand beside Sarah. I am here as living proof that sometimes our protocols are wrong and our certainties are false. Dr. Chun didn't violate containment recklessly. She did it because she saw what our advanced scanners missed. She didn't endanger the ship. She prevented the loss of a senior officer, and, more importantly, she proved that we've become too dependent on technology that can't adapt to novel situations. Another board member leaned forward. Your survival, while remarkable, could have been an anomaly. We cannot base medical policy on a single successful outcome. Then base it on two. Krathsik's voice boomed as he entered the chamber. The apex general's presence immediately shifted the atmosphere in the room. I am invoking my right as senior military commander to address this board, he said, moving to stand on Sarah's other side. Dr. Chun saved squadron leader Valther using methods we had dismissed as obsolete. She then saved herself using those same methods, as adapted by coalition physicians who learned from her example. In the process, she exposed a critical weakness in our medical infrastructure. We have optimized for efficiency at the cost of adaptability. Admiral Kreshtar's crystalline form flickered with complex colors. General Krathsik's, are you suggesting we abandon centuries of medical advancement? I'm suggesting we supplement it. Krathsix replied, Dr. Chun didn't succeed because Earth medicine is superior. She succeeded because she was willing to combine our technology with her species' hard-won experience in adaptive treatment. She proved that the newest member of the coalition has something valuable to teach the oldest. The general placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. If you court-martial her for that, you send a message that innovation is punishable and that saving lives matters less than following procedures. Is that the coalition you wish to lead? The silence that followed was profound finally. Admiral Kreshtar spoke. This board requires time to deliberate, she said. Dr. Chun, you are dismissed, but remain on call for further testimony. Sarah bowed slightly and left the chamber. Velthor and Krathsix flanking her like an honor guard. That could have gone worse. She said once they were in the corridor, it could have gone better. Krathsix replied, but I meant every word. If they're foolish enough to punish you, I'll make it clear what I think of that decision. 2 hours later, Sarah was summoned back to the chamber she entered alone this time. Walking to the center position with her head high, Admiral Kreshtar looked down at her, and Sarah couldn't read the expression on the alien's crystalline features. Dr. Sarah Chun, the Admiral began, this board has reviewed your actions, considered testimony from numerous witnesses, and examined the outcomes of your interventions. Sarah braced herself. The charges against you are hereby dismissed. Admiral Kreshtar continued. Furthermore, this board recognizes that your actions, while technically in violation of established protocols, were ethically sound and medically justified. Relief flooded through Sarah, but she kept her expression neutral. However, the Admiral said, and Sarah's relief faltered. This board also recognizes that the situation you addressed represents a systemic vulnerability in coalition medical practice. Therefore, we are establishing a new division within Coalition Medical Command. Emergency Adaptive Response. The Admiral's colors shifted to something that looked almost like approval. You, Dr. Chun, are hereby appointed as the founding director of this division. Your mission will be to develop protocols that combine coalition technology with adaptive treatment methodologies. You will also be responsible for training coalition medical personnel in these approaches. Sarah blinked, processing this unexpected turn. You're promoting me? We're giving you the authority to fix the problem you identified. Admiral Kreshtar corrected. Whether you consider that a promotion or a punishment will likely depend on how much you enjoy. Bureaucracy. Laughter rippled through the gallery. Sarah couldn't help but smile. I accept. 1 week later, Sarah stood in her new medical facility, a space 3 times larger than her previous assignment, equipped with both cutting-edge coalition technology and a surprising array of Earth-based medical equipment that had been requisitioned at her request. She was organizing supplies when she heard heavy footsteps behind her. Director Chun, Krathsix said, the title sounding strange in his rumbling voice. I see you've settled into your new position. Still settling, Sarah admitted, gesturing at the organized chaos around her. Turns out combining 2 completely different medical philosophies requires a lot of equipment. Krathsix nodded slowly, then pulled something from his uniform pocket. It was a small case, which he opened to reveal a medal, the Coalition Star, the highest civilian honor the government could bestow. This was approved yesterday, he said, for exceptional courage and innovation in service to the Coalition. Sarah stared at the medal, genuinely moved. General, I don't. Krathsix interrupted gently. Don't diminish what you did by calling it ordinary. You proved something important. Dr. Chun, he carefully pinned the medal to her uniform. For 200 years, I've led soldiers into battle. I've watched brave warriors die because retreat wasn't tactically sound. I've made the hard choices, the logical choices, the choices that sacrificed individuals for the greater good. His eyes met hers. But humans charge forward when logic says stop. You see someone dying, and your first instinct isn't to calculate odds. It's to fight. That's not primitive, Doctor. That's courage in its purest form. Perhaps we've optimized ourselves into a kind of cowardice, he continued. General Kratzix stood before the observation window with his clawed hands clasped behind his back, watching the dying warrior on the medical bed beyond the reinforced glass. The general's scales were dark green and battle-scarred, each mark telling a story of 200 years defending the Galactic Coalition from threats across 17 star systems. Today, he faced an enemy he could not fight with weapons or strategy. The Void Spore Squadron leader Velthor lay motionless except for the labored rise and fall of his chest, his 3 hearts struggling to pump blood that was slowly turning black from the contamination. The medical monitors painted a grim picture in colors that needed no translation. Red warnings covered every screen. Kratzix had served with Velthor for 60 years. They had survived ambush, boarding actions, and the siege of Carthan Prime together now. His second-in-command was dying from exposure to the most feared pathogen in known space. The progression is accelerating, Chief Physician Zixala said, her crystalline body refracting the harsh medical lights into rainbow patterns across the walls. She was Lumine, a species whose medical knowledge was considered the finest in the Coalition. Beside her stood Dr. Dekmer, an insectoid karate whose compound eyes could detect cellular breakdown at the microscopic level. Together, they represented the peak of galactic medicine. Together, they had declared Velthor's case hopeless. How long? Kratzix asked, his voice betraying no emotion despite the weight crushing his chest. 4 hours. Perhaps 5, Zixala replied, her musical voice somber. The void spores are consuming his neural tissue now. Even if we could stop the spread, the damage is irreversible. Dekmer clicked his mandibles in agreement, a gesture of finality among his people. We have administered every known treatment, General. The nanobots cannot identify the spores quickly enough. The energy scalpels cannot target them without destroying healthy tissue. And our most advanced antiviral compounds are ineffective. Kratzix closed his eyes briefly, the weight of command settling on his shoulders like armor he could never remove. Initiate. Mercy protocol, he said quietly. Evacuate all personnel from sections 7 through 12 and prepare for complete sterilization. We cannot risk the contamination spreading. Zixala bowed her head in acknowledgement and turned to input the commands. Doors to the medical bay hissed open. Belay that order. Everyone turned to see a human rushing into the room, her dark hair pulled back in a hasty knot. Her uniform jacket already half unbuttoned. Dr. Sarah Chen was breathing hard, as if she had run from the other side of the ship she carried. A datapad clutched against her chest. Kratzix's narrowed humans were the newest species admitted to the Galactic Coalition. Barely 3 decades since first contact, they were considered primitive by most standards. Their medical technology was centuries behind Coalition standard. Their lifespans were short, and their biology was fragile compared to most spacefaring races. Sarah Chun had been assigned to the fleet as part of the cultural exchange program, more as a courtesy than from any real need for her skills. Dr. Chun, this is not your concern, Kratzix said with the patience one might use with an enthusiastic child. Return to your quarters, with respect. General, I've been studying the preliminary scans you sent to all medical personnel, Sarah said, her words tumbling out quickly. I've seen this cellular breakdown pattern before. Not exactly the same, but similar enough that I think I can help. Zixala's crystalline form shimmered with what might have been amusement. Dr. Chun, we appreciate your enthusiasm, but the void spores are beyond even our capabilities. Your Earth-based medical knowledge, while quaint, is simply not applicable here. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. The pattern resembles necrotizing fasciitis combined with rapid-onset sepsis. On Earth, we've developed treatments for similar cascading tissue failures. Impossible. Dekmer clicked. Our records show humans still use surgical cutting implements and chemical compounds for treatment. Such methods are millennia outdated. Maybe, Sarah said, moving closer to the observation window. But those outdated methods kept humans alive long enough to develop the technology you're using now. She pressed her hand against the glass. Looking at Velther's still form, General, give me 6 hours. Krathsix turned his full attention to the human physician. She was small by coalition standards, barely reaching the middle of his chest. But there was something in her eyes that gave him pause. It was the same look he'd seen in soldiers before a desperate charge. Determination backed by acceptance of the consequences. No one can rescue him. Dr. Chun, Krathsix said, making each word clear, I will not delay the inevitable and risk contamination spreading to other sections of the ship. The Coalition cannot afford to lose this flagship. Sarah took a breath, then calmly began unbuttoning her uniform jacket completely. She folded it with deliberate care and set it on a nearby chair. Then she rolled up the sleeves of her shirt, the gesture somehow transforming her from a junior officer into something else entirely. Then court-martial me afterward. General, she said, meeting his eyes without flinching. I took an oath when I became a doctor. And it doesn't have exceptions for hopeless cases or superior orders. She walked to the containment lock controls. I'm going in. I forbid it. Krathsix's voice cracked like thunder across the medical bay Saras. Fingers moved across the console with surprising speed. Every coalition physician has emergency medical privilege to override. Quarantine in cases where they believe life-saving intervention is possible. It's in the Charter, Article 7, Section 12. Alarms began wailing as she initiated the override sequence. That provision has never been invoked, Zixela said, shocked. Probably because most coalition doctors accept defeat too easily. Sarah replied, the containment block disengaged with a heavy clunk. Security. Krathsix barked into his communicator. Restrain Dr. Chun immediately. But Sarah was already stepping through the lock, the heavy door sealing behind her with finality through the observation window. Krathsix watched the human walk calmly to where Velther lay dying. She didn't look back. General's hand hovered over his communicator, ready to order his guards to breach the containment and drag her out by force. But something stopped him. Perhaps it was the memory of Velther's courage in battle. The same refusal to accept defeat that this human now displayed. Perhaps it was curiosity about what this primitive species might attempt with their crude medicine, or perhaps, in the deepest part of himself that he rarely acknowledged, Krathsix wanted to believe that someone could prove him wrong. His handlord, how long before the guards can safely breach the containment? He asked quietly. 15 minutes to suit up properly, Jigsaw replied. Her voice uncertain. Krathsix nodded slowly. Then we wait 15 minutes, he said, and we watch what the human does on the other side of the glass. Sarah Chun pulled on a basic hazmat suit and approached the dying alien warrior. Rolling up her sleeves one more time beneath the protective material, she had 6 hours to do the impossible. She intended to use every second.